Dongwook could hear the sound of snapping jaws and scraping claws behind him. He glanced over his shoulder and shouted, "Hunter Cha!" Now, Hunifan had been trailing a few steps back. With a swift motion she drew her sword and slammed it into the ground. The blade trembled as she triggered her special skill. Provocation vibration. Vi-boom. A ripple of magical energy spread out from the sword, catching the guards off guard. Their eyes glowed strangely as they stopped mid-charge toward Dongwook, and turned sharply in Hound's direction. Dongwook couldn't help but smile to himself. Perfect. The guards were now charging straight for Houndson instead of him. Chef successfully gotten all the enemy's attention, putting them in a state of aggro. Now it was Dongwook's turn to step in. He stood his ground, blocking the queen's path as she charged toward Hyen like a lumbering robot. "You're mine," he said confidently. The queen wasn't happy about this obstacle. She let out an ear-piercing roar so loud, it could have been mistaken for a blaring loudspeaker or a screaming rock concert. Most tanks would have covered their ears to protect themselves. But Dongwook wasn't just any tank. He was the best in Korea.
"Hasusa!"
Dongwook shouted back, activating his powerful skill, Spirited Provocation. His voice echoed like thunder, and for a moment it felt like time itself had paused. The queen froze, caught off guard by his fearless challenge. Taeyang could attack a bunch of enemies at once, but Dongwook focused on one enemy at a time. The queen let out an angry scream and glared straight at him. His attack had worked perfectly. Dongwook knew he had to hold on until the others took down the guards and came to help. This was what Dongwook did best, protecting everyone. His eyes turned serious and he lifted his huge shield all the way to his face. Like always, he said a quiet prayer in his head. "Give me the power to keep myself and my team safe." Ka-boom. With so much at stake, the plan to take down the queen started with a massive explosion. "The hunters are on TV, dear. Aren't you gonna watch?" "I don't care. Come on. They said the hunters have a super good chance of beating those ants. Let's check it out together." "Yeah. Right? They always say stuff like that. I don't care." The old man grunted and turned back to his newspaper. A soft sound came from the hunched figure. Even this newspaper is all about hunters. Nothing else to read." The elderly woman heard her husband complaining and carefully closed their bedroom door. She let out a deep sigh. 2 years ago, things were different. Husband would eagerly follow news about Jeju Island and cheer for the hunters. But everything changed when they lost their only child to those terrifying ants. The sadness they felt when their world fell apart turned into anger toward the magic beasts. Her husband helped the hunters by giving money to the Hunters Association every time they went on a mission to fight these creatures. The night before each hunt he was so nervous he couldn't sleep. But the more he hoped for success, the bigger his letdown when things didn't go as planned. When their third big mission fell apart, he lost his spark and wasn't the same for a while. After that he quit talking about hunters altogether. The old man had given up hope. The elderly woman sighed again and grabbed the TV remote in the living room. She flipped it on and the host's exciting voice boomed out. "The famous hunters are about to face the queen ant." She'd started watching just as the battle was beginning. The elderly woman grabbed her hands tightly and watched with wide eyes, feeling nervous but super excited. She turned her head away whenever a hunter got hurt, but cheered loudly when they landed an attack. "Oh my. Oh my. Oh, finally. They defeated the first magic beast." That was just the start. The hunters worked together, and soon the ants started falling one by one. Every time an ant went down, the whole building seemed to shake from all the cheering and clapping. "Oh dear. Oh dear. 4. There are only 4 left. They've already taken down half." She suddenly felt a sting in her eyes as tears welled up. She felt a deep gratitude for the hunters who were risking their lives to protect everyone. Her heart was heavy with sadness as she thought of her son, who had been super excited about his new job on Jeju Island. "Only 2 guards are left," she said, trying to sound hopeful. "If the hunters can just take down these last 2, they'll be able to attack the queen next. Victory is within reach."
"The host!"
exclaimed. Then, slam, the bedroom door burst open, and an older man rushed out. His wife called after him, but he didn't answer. He stood frozen in front of the TV, his eyes wide and red. His fists were tight, and they shook with excitement. The host's voice kept coming, tense with suspense. "The hunters have taken down all of the queen's strongest guards. Now only the queen is left. If they defeat her, The rest of the ants will be wiped out for good. The hunters didn't waste a second. They went straight for the queen. Dong-wook had done his part perfectly, keeping the queen busy, and giving the others the chance to finish the job. The 5 hunters took off running from behind him. The old man was already crying, his fist pumped high in the air as he shouted, "Ugh!" At the TV station, the executive director jumped for joy. Phones were blowing up with calls. Messages of support were flooding in from all over the country. "Sus. Our ratings just went over 85%. Someone exclaimed. The executive grinned, tightening his fists. Hitting 85% was such a big deal that even if the Korean soccer team made it to the World Cup finals, this record might never be beaten. "We did it," he cheered. And when he thought about all the money they'd already made, and would keep making from other countries, cha-ching. The director rubbed his face with both hands as he sat back in his chair. Everyone else in the control room let out a sigh of relief, thrilled to see their boss so happy. On the screen, the Korean hunters were dominating the queen. The United States, China, Russia, and France. Someone announced, South Korea is about to join the list of countries that have beaten an S-ranked dungeon. The director wiped the sweat on his forehead with a handkerchief. Excellent. Excellent. He said, the queen was almost defeated, and all the hunters had to do now was escape the ant cave safely after winning. But then, skak, krabba, abba, 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 abba. The director jumped in surprise as a producer rushed to turn down the volume. The director walked up to him, looking worried. Producer nah, what was that noise? It's, unedited video coming from Jeju Island. He replied, I think the sound came from the queen ant. From the queen. The TV broadcast was delayed, because things don't always go as planned during a raid, and broadcasting live would be too risky. The director looked up from the footage with a grin. Who wants to hear a monster scream right now? This is supposed to be a big moment of victory. Why not just edit that part out, or turn down the volume? Producer now nodded, saying, Yes sir, as the director gave their shoulder a friendly pat of encouragement. Just then, another staff member burst in, looking super serious. The director turned around, already guessing something was off, from experience. When someone looked like that during a recording session, it wasn't to share good news. He had a bad feeling even before he heard the news. He really hoped his gut was wrong this time, but it rarely was. What's going on? He asked, his voice tight with worry. The employee sounded confused. The Japanese hunters are leaving Jeju Island right now. What? Dong-wook's eyes widened in surprise. He took a deep breath and cheered his team on loudly. We've got this. Keep pushing forward. The queen was on the verge of collapsing, so they just needed to try a bit harder. Taeju's arrows stuck out from the queen's head like a porcupine's quills, and then came another arrow, hitting her right between the eyes. The queen yelped in pain and shook her head wildly. Scree! But she didn't stay hurt for long. In an instant, she snapped back to normal, and shot out a stream of bubbling green poison all over the den. Treach! Ash! Ash! It spread so fast that the hunters had no time to dodge. Luckily Byung-gu was ready to heal their burned skin. The queen let out another furious screech when she realized her poison wasn't working. She chomped down on Dong-wook's chest with her huge jagged jaws. Crunch! But Dong-wook had used his advanced reinforcement skill to protect himself, so he could handle the queen's bite. He blocked one side of her mouth with his shield, and pushed the other side back with his free hand. Just as he was holding her off, a fiery explosion slammed into the queen's side. Brum! Jongun had cast a fireball spell, hitting her right on target. The queen roared in anger, struggling to stay on her feet. That's when Yoon-ho, now transformed into a powerful animal-like magic beast, jumped onto her back. With incredible strength he grabbed one of her giant mandibles, and ripped it straight out. Gurm! He landed smoothly on the ground, panting heavily from the effort. Yoon-ho knew one thing for sure. The queen was done for. Experience had taught him that the boss of these bloodthirsty creatures which had spilled the lives of so many, was about to meet her end. They were so close. Just as this thought crossed his mind, powerful emotions surged up from deep within him, but before they could stop her, the queen suddenly lifted her head toward the sky, and let out a deafening screech skra. Ass. The sound echoed through the entire cave. making Yunho's eyes twitch in shock. What was that? Was it a roar or a last cry? A high-pitched noise pierced the air, sounding almost like a desperate plea. Was she calling out to someone? The thought sent shivers down his spine. Shut her up. Yunho was ready to act when Hyen leaped gracefully through the air, swinging her sword with all her might. Juchka! The queen's head hit the ground before Hyenath landed. Thud, the cameraman, who had been holding his breath the whole time, now raised both hands high, tears streaming down his face. After 4 long years it was finally over. Huff, huff, Dongwook panted, giving his team a big thumbs up with a grin. Tien let out a deep breath of relief. Dongam flashed a big grin as he pushed up his glasses. Taiju pumped his fists like he just won a championship. Each of them celebrated in their own unique way. But then there was Yuan. He looked pale, his hands shaking as a weirdly nervous feeling grew in the pit of his stomach. Hey guys, Jongam said, interrupting the moment. We're officially one of only 7 teams worldwide to ever clear an S-rank gate. That's huge. Are you old? Just then, Dongwook, who had been talking to command, looked up with a shocked and angry face. There was no time to waste, he shouted urgently at his teammates, who were resting. All the ants are heading straight for us, because the Japanese hunters left the island. We need to get out of here now. What? I thought we had more time. Dongwook snapped back at his panicked teammates. Forget about an hour. 20 S-rank hunters couldn't even last 30 minutes. We don't know what happened. The association is trying to figure things out, but Japan isn't responding anymore.
Those jerks.
Jongan muttered angrily. Would the Japanese hunters have given up so easily if they were from the same country? Either way, they could deal with being upset later, once they made it out alive. Dongwook kept his cool to stop his teammates from panicking. Yunho pushed everyone toward the exit, as calm as he could. Move, he shouted. The team hurried back the same way they had come. But then, Yunho froze in his tracks at the front of the group. Ah, he muttered, his eyes fixed on something ahead. Yunho, Byung-gu, asked, stopping suddenly right behind him. That caused everyone else to bump into each other like dominoes. Yunho's hand started shaking. As he stared straight ahead. No way, he whispered, disbelief spreading across his face. This couldn't be real. No, this shouldn't be happening. As he saw a shadow get closer, memories of that human-sized egg in the nursery flashed into his mind. This much power from just one magic beast. Yunho turned pale. The other hunters stepped back from the entrance, sensing something was seriously wrong. What's going on? One asked, confused. Are the ants back already? Another wondered. But then, a winged ant slowly emerged from the darkness before them. Tien felt something odd as she watched the magic beast ant crawl into its den. That's really weird, she thought. And can't sense its presence at all. If she hadn't been able to see it with her own eyes, she might not have even noticed it was there. Out of all the hunters and magic beasts she'd ever met, only 2 had ever been like this strange magic beast ant in front of her. And Jin-Woo. Just a few days ago, Jin-Woo had shown off a glimpse of his true power during a spar with Ryuji. What if Jin-Woo had suddenly turned against them and come after them? The thought made her feel trapped, and a chill ran down her spine. Just imagining it made her freeze. The Korean team was already exhausted from fighting the queen, and now an unknown ant showing up was the last thing they needed. That thing, someone muttered. There's something really weird about it, isn't there? Another said. I'm getting chills. As Yunho and Haijin couldn't figure out what was spooking them, but everyone else could tell something felt off. Astum Shilp. Even though it was just one magic beast, the atmosphere around them had completely changed. What were they supposed to do now? Dongwook stood there, trying to decide their next move. When something unexpected happened, it was up to the leader to act fast, especially when every second counted. A magical monster had appeared, and all they needed to do was get rid of it. But wait, why did everything feel so off? Before he could figure it out, a giant magic beast ant was almost right on top of them. The tension in the air grew thick, as the situation unfolded without wasting another heartbeat. The creature moved without making a sound, which was super spooky. Dongwook knew he couldn't hesitate, but by the time he decided to listen to reason instead of his instincts, the beast was gone. Where did it go? Dongwook's eyes were wide as he scanned the area. The other hunters were searching too. Then the cameraman shouted, "Behind you." The hunters quickly turned around, startled. The giant ant zoomed right past the hunters. They couldn't believe their eyes. It was already in front of the queen before they could react. "How did it get by us?" one hunter asked, shocked. Jin-Woo had already noticed something strange with his special eyes of a beast ability, and now the others were catching on too. Thud thud thud, their hearts pounded, and their breathing got faster. Dong-wook wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. This was no ordinary ant. It seemed totally not interested in them. Instead, it just stared at the queen who lay still on the ground. The ant lifted its head high into the air, and let out an ear-piercing screech that felt like it could shake the whole cave. Skiarayabae. The sound was so loud, it seemed to knock the strength right out of everyone. The cameraman's legs gave out first with a thud. Then, one by one, the hunters dropped to their knees. Whump, whump. Dong-wook stared in shock, clutching the ground like it was the only thing keeping him up. "I can't believe a scream could knock me off my feet," he muttered. Skiarayabae. The ant's screech went on, relentless. When it finally stopped, only one person was still standing, Haein. But even she was trembling, her legs wobbly like they might give out at any second. Launching a counterattack seemed impossible. The massive magic beast ant turned towards Haein and her team, its anger palpable. Her eyes grew wide with shock as the ant's twisted face showed pure fury. Calmly she reached for the hilt of her sword, but the ant moved quicker than she could react. With a swift zoom it appeared right before her face, making Haein flinch in surprise. She didn't even have time to react.
Kakaopow! A punch to the side of her head sent Haein flying into a wall. She crumpled to the ground with a thud. Her colleagues were shocked. How could their strongest member go down from just one hit? But there was no time to stand around in awe or confusion. The situation was urgent, and they had to act fast.
The hunters had just seen how strong their enemy was, so they knew the longer they waited, the bigger the danger became. Dong-wook, the tank, made the first move. "Graza," he shouted, as he bear hugged the ant from behind, using all his strength. He squeezed the ant's body with so much power he could have pulled a giant tree right out of the ground. Veins popped out on Dong-wook's neck and arms like they might burst. Then he screamed. The magic beast ant arched its back, and in a flash Dong-wook's arms snapped off at the shoulders. He crumpled to his knees, armless and helpless. Jin-Woo shouted, "No," and dove forward. If Jin-Woo hadn't acted fast, Dong-wook would have been done for right there on the spot. Jin-Woo's face twisted in anger, and he clenched his fists tightly. His body sprouted white fur, and his nails turned into sharp claws. With a burst of speed, he zoomed after the tiny creature. But in a flash, the little creature vanished. Where did it go? Even with his super-sharp vision, he couldn't track its movements. Suddenly, a loud cry echoed from behind. Argyris. It was Jongin, startled in the middle of his spell. An enormous ant clawed at his chest, and the mage crumpled to the ground with a groan. Taiju had been hiding nearby, about 5 paces away from Jongin, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Now he fired a glowing arrow at the ant. "There's no way I'll miss," Taiju thought, watching it soar. But then noise. The ant snatched the arrow out of the air, and snapped it like a twig. Taiju stared in disbelief. How was this possible? Before he could shoot again, the ant was already looming over him. "Shit," he muttered, just before the ant punched him square in the face. Taiju flew backward, dazed. As soon as the ant turned its back on Jin-Woo, the hunter jumped into action. The beast moved super fast, grabbing Jin-Woo's head and slamming his face into the dirt with a loud hunch. Jin-Woo's body jerked from the blow. Just as the giant ant tried to crush his face again, Dong-wook jumped into action. He charged at the ant's shoulder first with a adem, knocking it to the ground. The ant quickly got back on its feet, but Dong-wook was ready. His missing arms had grown back, and he tackled the beast like a tank in perfect shape. The ant swung at him hard, sending Dong-wook tumbling to the ground once again. The ant kept beating the other hunters, one after another, but those hunters were super fast at healing. They bounced back quickly and jumped right back into the fight. The ant figured out there must be a healer around, and started searching the area. Byung-gu stayed calm. He had one trick to protect himself, camouflage. It was like stealth, hiding him from view, but he had to stay completely still for it to work. Even so, it was an important skill for a healer. It let him stay in one place and focus on healing others. The magic beast changed its strategy when it sensed healing magic coming from somewhere hidden. It grabbed Dong-wook, who was one of the strongest hunters, by the legs and held him upside down in the air. "What is it doing?" Byung-gyu asked nervously as he watched the creature's new move. The ant started breaking Dong-wook's bones slowly. Byung-gyu kept pouring his healing magic into the tank. There was no other way. If he stopped even for a second, Dong-wook wouldn't survive. Sweat dripped down Byung-gyu's face as he focused on the spell. Then, in an instant, the ant locked eyes with him. Oh no. Byung-gyu's heart raced. He blinked once, and when he opened his eyes, the ant was gone. "Byung-gyu," Yun-hao shouted. Before Byung-gyu could react, a sharp pain struck. Sunk. There was a sudden attack sound. Blood burst from Byung-gyu's mouth as he cried out in agony. Byung-gyu's stomach felt like it was on fire. He looked down and saw a huge hole right in his stomach. A black ant's arm stuck out through the gaping wound. He lifted his head, locked eyes with Yun-ho, and shouted, "Yun-ho, run." Yun-ho tried to get up, but his left leg was hurt too badly to hold him. Crunch. The ant snapped its jaws shut again, and again. Crunch. 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 "No!" Yun-ho screamed, hobbling toward them as fast as he could. The ant left Byung-gyu's lifeless body behind, and clamped its strong jaws onto Yun-ho's neck. Yun-ho tried to break free, but the ant's grip was too tight. Then, in a shocking twist, the ant opened its mouth, and spoke in a voice that sounded exactly like Byung-gyu's, except for a few strange crackling sounds mixed in. "Yun-ho, run. Yun-ho, run," it repeated. Yun-ho's eyes widened in confusion. How was this happening? The magic beast ant kept saying the same words over and over, its voice mimicking Byung-gyu perfectly. Finally the ant locked eyes with Yun-ho, and said something else. "You are weak." The words sent chills down Yun-ho's spine. It was surreal to hear such a familiar voice coming from this terrifying creature. Yun-ho's eyes widened in shock as he heard the ant speak. "How?" he gasped, barely getting the word out. The ant's voice was strange but definitely Korean. "Our queen is dead," the ant hissed. Yun-ho struggled to breathe as the ant's grip tightened around his neck. "I killed your soldiers, but it wasn't enough. Who is your king?" Yun-ho's mind raced frantically. Yun-ho's mind raced frantically. Yun-ho's mind raced by them time. Yun-ho's mind flashed back to the Japanese team that had left them behind. Among those teammates, one name stood out. Ryuji, who was super strong compared to the others. Outside. The ant muttered, in a low, rumbling voice. Outside. The tiny creature tilted its head, as if searching for something important. After a moment of silence it spoke again with a hint of excitement. "There is a strong one here." The beast let go of Yun-ho like he was nothing more than a sack of potatoes, as if he wasn't even worth the effort. The creature vanished in an instant. Yun-ho coughed loudly, gasping for air, and quickly looked around. They had no time to waste. They needed to escape before the beast came back. But then, tack tack tack. While the hunters were busy fighting the huge monster, the swarm of ants had sneaked back to their nest, and were now rushing into the queen's den. Ryuji slid his sword back into its scabbard, and frowned. He muttered.